I'm going to introduce Colonel Benjamin Cassidy. He's a retired colonel, and we're going to hear more from him over the 2024, so I'm just going to leave it at that. He's going to introduce General Kelly.
Thank you, Kathy. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's my privilege to introduce General John Kelly. With your permission, I'll forego reviewing General Kelly's distinguished biography and instead share a very brief story. John Kelly was once a new Marine Corps second lieutenant, about as far from being a four-star general or White House chief of staff as a man or a woman could be. It's 1976. And Kelly reports to 2nd Battalion, 2nd Marine Regiment, Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and is assigned as the officer in charge of the regimental dining facility, or the mess hall. Our regimental commander, a stern, humorless colonel, pointed at 2nd Lieutenant Kelly and said, "You're the new mess officer, Kelly." And, "Yes, sir." "I fired your predecessor." "Yes, sir." "So don't screw it up." "Yes, sir." Imagine a restaurant open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, capable of feeding 1,000 young, voraciously hungry, sometimes cold, wet, and exhausted Marines, 3 or more meals a day. That was our mess hall. Realize that the mess hall is a beehive of social activity, the scene of 18 to 20-year-old Marines eating, drinking, talking, shouting, telling tall tales, and having fistfights. Consider how vital the mess hall is to morale and well-being. Think steak and eggs going into battle. And last but not least, you must understand the characters who run the mess hall, the cooks. A singular calling, the cooks are the desperados of the Marine Corps, wily, crafty, ornery, overworked, underpaid banditos, often forgotten and always looked down upon by their more glamorous infantry brethren. So John Kelly arrives and does his initial reconnaissance of the situation. The food is poor, cooks are not showing up for work, their mess white uniforms are stained with yesterday's gravy. The account books aren't balancing as spices and utensils disappear out the back door unaccounted for. Undaunted, John Kelly gets down to business. Within hours, he begins to instill a sense of pride in his cooks, his Marines. No easy job. Within days, food quality and service improved dramatically. Within weeks, our mess hall is the best of the 3 in the 2nd Marine Division. Within months, it's nominated as one of the best mess halls in the entire Marine Corps. All in great measure to the leadership, character, appetite for hard work, and sacrifice of 2nd Lieutenant John Kelly. For John Kelly, life is about service, whether leading his Marines in combat, advising the Secretary of Defense, fighting drug cartels, or serving as a White House Chief of Staff. John understands people. He cares about people and leads them with a sense of pride, responsibility, and accountability. Yes, no matter if you're the President of the United States or that Marine Corps cook a lifetime ago. Fast forward to today, right now, right here, you won't find John Kelly's name listed on boards of Fortune 50 corporations or as a talking head on Fox or CNN. You will find him quietly, conscientiously continuing a lifetime of service to his family, our armed forces, and his country. John, it's an honor to have you here today. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And Ben, thanks for bringing up bad memories. I'll start by saying that I guess I'm going to talk for a little while, then we'll do Q&A. As far as I'm concerned, everything's on the table. I'll do the best I can to inform and certainly entertain a little bit. But I'll just start by saying, again, as Ben pointed out, I spent my entire life up until 2016, in the armed forces. I was 45 years in the Marine Corps. Didn't ever think I'd stay that long. My initial time was 2 years as an enlisted Marine. But as I mentioned to some people last night, the Marine Corps, and I did not know what I was getting into. No one that goes in the Marine Corps, and for that matter, the armed forces, but the Marine Corps in particular, really knows what they're getting into. But the Marine Corps changed my life. And the men and women back in those days, particularly mostly men, were overwhelmingly working class. Most of them had just come out of Vietnam. And again, real Americans. And so when given the opportunity to get commissioned and stay in, I still only thought I'd stay in for 4 or 5 years as an officer. But again, changed my life and to say the least, became a life of service. When I got out of the Marine Corps, after all of those years, I was starting to look for something to do and all of that. But frankly, I was a little bit lost because I'd never done anything in my life but serve the country. And the whole family was like that. So I get a call one day, and I did not know former president at all. And I got a call from his staff and said, hey, the president-elect, Trump, would like you to consider going into the administration. You know, and I had, as a military guy, you kind of have a generally low opinion of well, you know, and but I talked to him, and I actually had known Mike Pence from one of my jobs in the Marine Corps. I worked at Capitol Hill a number of times, so I know Mr. Pence as a congressman. But anyways, he got on the phone and said, "Hey, John, you know, seriously, this is Mike Pence. Seriously, the president-elect would like you to consider coming on board." And so we talked back and forth a little bit. And I was on the couch with my wife. It was Saturday, about 3 weeks after the election. And I said, my wife, I hung up and I agreed to go up to Bedminster, and I live in Virginia, and get interviewed, if you will. And my wife said, she's from Jersey now, so. My wife said, what was that all about? And I told her Mike Pence, and they offered to maybe go in the administration. And I said, what do you think? And she said, well, you know, if the Kelly family is nothing else, it's a family of service. So you ought to do that. And then she said, Jersey girl. And besides, all of this quality time we're spending together in retirement, it's not what it's cracked up to be. So I did that. And but let me go back. I'm supposed to talk about the world and military things and all. So let me go back. And many of you remember this. You know, many of us spent our entire lives initially in the Cold War, right? Yeah, post World War II, the United States it decided to stay engaged in the world and try to put some sense of stability in the world, and that's where NATO came from and all of that. Soviet Union, you know, we squared off with them and deterred them. And all of our alliances, NATO and all the other things we do, are deterrent alliances. They're not aggressive, offensive alliances. They're deterrent to prevent war. And it worked so well. And over the years, the Soviet Union just collapsed. As we all kind of knew, not me, but most people thought, because that system doesn't work. Top down, telling people, you know, what to do and how to do it, you know, no initiative, no capitalism, all of that. We knew they were going to collapse, and they did collapse. And the good news was there had not been we were involved in a couple of wars, but God forbid that terrible nuclear war. Came close a couple of times. But we understood each other, the Soviets in the United States. We understood each other and how to diffuse crises before they got out of hand. Cuban Missile Crisis was the first one, and then, of course, the 1973 Arab-Israeli war that started to involve the United States and the Soviet Union in ways that we started to go up that escalation ladder. But luckily, we understood each other, and the right kind of people diffused it. So it's the end of the Cold War, right? The collapse. We all remember those wonderful pictures of the wall being torn down. And you know, I can remember the reporting at the time where the East Germans were coming through the wall into West Germany, into West Berlin, and going to something that they didn't have in East Germany, supermarkets. Remember that? And going into the supermarkets and looking at, and I can remember they were holding bananas. They'd never seen bananas before in their life. Bananas, I mean, you know. It was so impactful that they kind of then went back home back through the wall into their homes in East Germany. That's what communism and socialism does to people. And luckily, at that time, we thought it was all over. And if you remember, again, President Reagan, then President Bush made commitments. One of the things one of the big concerns of now the Russians, not the Soviets, was that that we would get aggressive, and because they were not only economic collapse, but their military was in collapse. And we promised them, the West, but the United States of America said, no, we're going to help you. The Marshall Plan in Germany at the end of World War II, what we did for bitter allies then became friends in Japan after World War II. We helped them rebuild. And we told the old Soviet Union, now Russia, that we would do the same and help them. And in fact, Jim Baker, who was a great man, he was a lot of things, but at this point in time, he was the Secretary of State. And he guaranteed Mr. Gorbachev, who was the head of the Soviet Union at the time, now the head of Russia, when the Soviet Union collapsed. And then after him, talking to Yeltsin, who took over, Boris Yeltsin and he guaranteed the biggest fear was aggressive Europe pushing against them militarily. He guaranteed them, not 1 inch, quote, will NATO grow. Not 1 inch. Now, of course, we know today, and I'm not being critical, it's grown quite a bit. Virtually all of the old Warsaw Pact countries are now part of NATO, and Sweden, of course, and Finland, because they're afraid. The Europeans are afraid of what's going on in Russia. But we guaranteed them we wouldn't grow any bigger. And of course, Yeltsin uses that as an example of the fact that we cannot be trusted. The other thing that happened at that time, 1/3 of all of the thermonuclear strategic weapons that were aimed at the United States, missile fields, were all in Ukraine. And they became the 3rd largest nuclear power in the world. And the Ukrainians didn't know how to do anything with the nuclear. But the good news is Senators Nunn and Lugar from the United States, a program, they started interacting with the Ukrainians and said, look, give the weapons up. We will demilitarize them. We won't keep them. We're going to demilitarize them. And if you do that, because this is a very dangerous period, if you do that, we will guarantee your safety. So just remember those two things. I'm not making excuses for Putin in Ukraine, but I am saying that the Ukrainians say, hey, you guys. So as time went on, when the wall came down and all of that, one of the first things the Congress did was they significantly cut the U.S. military. Remember the peace dividend? And it took us quite a while because as things got better and then started to get worse in Russia, things changed. And we were really caught left-footed because we had cut the budget so much and the size of the U.S. military. And then over time, we began to, reestablish the budget and all of that. And oh, by the way, at almost the same time, the Clinton administration, looking at China, said, we can do the same thing in China that happened in the Soviet Union. We can work with them, bring them into the world community. They will get all liberal, not liberal, but they'll get all democratic and everything. Bad word to use here, I know, but they get all Republican, and it'll be a better country. And the Communist Party will collapse just like in the old Soviet Union. Didn't work out that way, but they were let into the world community, and that started a process that today makes them the 2nd largest economy in the world. When they started this process 40, 50 years ago, they were like the worst economy in the large economy. They were nothing. They had no military to speak of except for infantry. They had no air force. They had no technology. They had no navy. Largest navy in the world today, very technologically advanced. An unbelievably technologically advanced air force. Same thing. They've got a very, very good navy and a very, very good infantry force and all that. There's something to be reckoned with. So you have that going on in Russia. At the same time, we're betting on the come in China, and we lost. And what we did was help China get to where they are today faster. And then you have the problems of Iran and all of that. It's a serious concern because the good news under the old Cold War was that there were rules. And the big dogs in the park, the United States and the Soviet Union, understood the rules. And we made our allies play by the rules, and they made their allies play by the rules. Those rules are all gone now. And the people that knew how to control violence and knew how to stop just short of a nuclear war or an invasion of a country, they're all gone now. In fact, quite the contrary. We stand on an abyss right now. I mean, this is a very, very dangerous world. I was recently in fact, 2 weeks ago, I spent 2 weeks in Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines. Great partners, big defense budgets, working with us along with Australia and other allies and partners out there. But they're so close to the problem, they're scared stiff. And they will do anything we ask them to do. And the greatest comfort is that the United States has made commitments and they believe we'll stand up to those commitments. Their greatest fear is, of course, that we won't. And both candidates, I'm not a politician, but both candidates in the election, they have, if it's President Biden, they're concerned about certain things about him, and if Mr. Trump becomes president again, concerned about, but they are staunch allies. But they really need to be, because they can't deal with China by themselves. And of course, the Chinese have determined that they will be the #1 economy in the world. They're 5-7 years away from that if we don't change our economy in the way we do business. Militarily, they're actually bigger than we are. We're still better, but God forbid if a war breaks out in that part of the world with that particular country, we will not have seen casualties like that since World War II. And it'll be overnight, and it'll be huge. And oh, by the way, the world economy will collapse. You know, I read recently where 80% of everything sold in the biggest retailer in the United States, Walmart, 80% of everything sold in there, with the exception of produce, is made in China. 100% of the baby formula consumed in the country, 100%, almost 100% of every pharmaceutical, every vitamin, or every made there. And I could go on and on and on. The world economy, because if a war broke out, again, God forbid, in the Pacific, nothing's going to be exported out. And obviously, nothing's going to be things that we sell them and give them, and the West gives them. And the economy overnight will just tank. It's one of the reasons I think the Chinese will not act too crazy, because they realize how immediately the impact will be on their economy. Not that they really care about their people. What they care about is their people getting enraged and doing another Tiananmen Square kind of thing. And, if it happens, they machine gunned, 7,000 or 8,000 in Tiananmen Square 20 years ago. They'll do it again. They don't see them as citizens. They see them as, but we're close. And then the deal with Ukraine. My belief is something's going to have to be settled in Ukraine. I think they're working that right now. And maybe it'll be a ceasefire line that's in place for a long, long time. But the fear, of course, and if you happen to be from the Baltics, Estonia, Latvia, they not only fear they're next, they know they're next. If the world doesn't stop what Putin is trying to do. And Putin, I think if he was here, and he was telling the truth, he'd admit, I just thought Ukraine would collapse in a week or two. I had no idea they were going to fight us. But if we walk away from supporting, I believe, not with troops, but with assistance and other things that I can't talk about the way we support them, then I think the Europeans, I know the Baltics know they're next. The Finns are crazy concerned. And so let's talk about the Middle East. I mean, you got Iran, that is a terrorist state through and through. Again, they're not free. They're not free people. Their people are controlled in a way that, again, the same kind of way that the Chinese control their people. But the point is, and they don't have nuclear weapons yet, but I was recently there in the Middle East talking to a number of our Middle East friends. Again, they're deathly afraid that the Iranians will get a nuclear weapon. Right now, the expectation is if they wanted a nuclear weapon, they could have one. I know John Bolton was here. I don't know if he commented on it, but they could probably have a nuclear weapon in a month or so. because they're a technologically advanced country. They know how to make, they know how to make the uranium, all the components, and they just put that together. But in talking to countries like Saudi Arabia and other friends out there, they say if they get a nuke, we have to get a nuke right away. And of course, they can buy nukes from certain countries that are out that way. So you'd have this nuclear race there. And then, of course, the issues related to Palestine, Israel, and the terrorism that they're dealing with. And yes, they could do a better job in some of the things they're doing right now. Yes, I think it's time for them to sit down at the table and talk and try to settle this issue. But at the end of the day, that's another hot spot in our country. Not to mention, right now, what's going on in the Red Sea, backed by Iran. They've all but closed the Red Sea. Virtually, 70% of all the world trade goes through the Red Sea, Suez Canal. So everything coming out of Europe or going to Europe goes through the Red Sea, and everything going to China and out to Asia goes through the Red Sea, except for the stuff that comes out of the United States. And they've all but closed the Red Sea because the insurance companies won't insure the merchant ships. So that will have, it's already having an effect on the economies out that way, but over time will affect our economy as well. And again, it's Iranian-backed Houthi rebels who are shooting at these unarmed merchant ships. They just killed 3 sailors the other day, civilian sailors. So that's where we are in the world. And then, again, I'm not a politician, this is not politics, but we have a existential threat in our country right now that is doing more damage to us and has been doing more damage to us as a people than ever happened in any of the wars we've ever been in. And that is the use of drugs and the impact of drugs on our country. And I'm talking about fentanyl, heroin, methamphetamine, and cocaine. On that terrible day in 9/11, 3,000 roughly Americans, 2,900 Americans were killed. Horrible, to say the least. The good news is, since then, we have not really lost an American to terrorism. But if you consider what narco-terrorism, when I was in the United States Southern Command, we used to call it not narcotics or cartels, we called it narco-terrorists. They import so much of this trash, garbage into our country. Since 9/11, 2.5 million Americans have died from drug overdoses. 100% of the drugs come up through Mexico, 2.5 million. When I first was at Southcom, United States Southern Command, say in 2013, the annual death rate was about 85,000. It was 120,000 last year, and it's getting worse. And that's not even considering, there were people, and I can tell you a story about some firefighters I was talking to, but there's some people that say in the drug world and the addiction world, the 2.5 million may be the lucky ones, because at least it's over for them. You can't put even an estimate of the impact that drugs have on our people, whether they're homeless, whether they're living in their parents' basements. I bet there's people, don't show your hands, there's people in there that probably lost family members to drugs. And it's getting worse and worse and worse. When I was at United States Southern Command, we wouldn't even take notice when we did drug interdiction, we measured the interdiction in tons of drugs, Navy and Air Force, and Coast Guard. When they report and say, hey, sir, we got a big hit last night, cocaine, how much? 8 tons. 8 tons. Or up in Mexico, working with the Mexican military, hey, big bust with heroin. How much? 900 pounds of heroin. It's crazy. And frankly, and maybe I'll end with it, because this is a serious threat to our country. Southwest border. It's wide open. When I was at DHS, I learned that some of the finest men and women in this country that protect us are in DHS. They fight the home game. U.S. military fights the away game, right? The DHS, FBI people, they fight the home game. We have never done anything in our country to reduce the drug demand from our society. We've never done anything. Back in the Reagan years, remember the Just Say No? I mean, that was cute and everything, it was nice. But we have changed behavior, whether it was speeding, drunken driving, seatbelt use, cigarette smoking. We have changed behaviors, but we've never truly tried to convince Americans that your drug demand, whether it's you're addicted or it's recreational, you're causing the problems of Latin America and places like that. When I first time I went, I think it was Guatemala. They just had a democratic election, great country, and I was talking to. I was down there at the embassy. Used to go to all of the embassies down there, and they were having a reception. I was there, and they were just sworn in the new government, and the equivalent of our Attorney General, Minister of Justice, was talking to me, and he was all happy about being there and all of that. But he told me the story, which is frightening to say the least. He said, as soon as I got, designated to be the new Attorney General down here, my best friend contacted me and said, "Hey, you can make a lot of money. You don't have to do anything, but I know people that might ask you not to do something. The drug people, the cartels." And he said, "You're not my friend anymore, and I can't be bought," and all of that, all the things you would hope he'd say. A couple of days later, gets a CD in the mail, and on the CD is a picture of him and his wife and his two little girls leaving the house, going to church on Sunday morning. And then a sequence after that of his mother-in-law, the two little girls at the local park. And then another few like that. You know what the message was. As he said, I said, "What are you going to do?" He said, "I'll do as little as I can get away with." He told me he had friends that were in similar positions where one of their kids were kidnapped. And the CD they got in the mail, I won't tell you what it was, but it was awful. And they just said, "Okay, you got 4 more." That's what our drug demand does to those countries. And our drug demand generates hundreds of billions of dollars a year for the cartels. Their biggest problem is not, getting the money. It's how do they launder it, right? Again, when I'd get a report from the Southern Command folks about, hey, they got a huge money, they'd tell me they wouldn't count it. It would be weighed. So we got a ton of money last night, and there's no coins. It's all dollar bills or 10s and 20s, and got 900 pounds of money. Our drug demand that we do nothing about, and that our law enforcement men and women, and believe me, I know, are not allowed to enforce the laws, have a direct result and a disastrous result on these countries. But again, even if we didn't care about them, what is it doing? What it's doing to our country? It's phenomenal, and that was my life when I was at Southcom. The good news is we do have good friends and partners that are working with us in the South, in spite of the fact that their families are at risk. I mean, think of it. In the southern part of the hemisphere, hundreds of police officers, military people are killed every year trying to stop the drugs coming into our country. Hundreds. Dozens of media types who write stories about the drug cartels in Mexico and Guatemala and Colombia are murdered. Mayors and presidents down there that won't cooperate are murdered, or members of their family are murdered. So, and that's very much a threat right here and now. So the end result of all of that should be, this should be a big deal in our country. And when we talk about politics and who we elect and all of that, I got to tell you, if they're not talking about this drug issue and what we can do to stop it, and yes, we could do a heck of a lot more on the southwest border, because the men and women at Customs and Border Protection are very good at what they do. All they have to do is be allowed to do the law, or to enforce the law, but they don't. Right now, it's wide open. And we have to, I think, not only raise people's awareness of this, but we have to hold politicians accountable. And I don't want to get into the politics of things, but I can tell you, I can guarantee you, if you told the Customs and Border Protection people right now, do your job and step back, it would be very, very different on the border, very different. And the final thing I'll say about the border, 7 million or so, the deal with the border is if you want to come in here and claim asylum, you come across the river and you look for the first person in uniform and go up and say, hey, I'm John Kelly and I want to claim asylum. And that starts a process that they're given essentially a very quick processing, and then they're told, Here's an appointment thing. In 7.5 years, come back here to this place in Texas and an immigration judge, 7.5 years. That's how long it is now. When I was at Southcom, it was about 1.5 years. 7.5 years. So the vast majority that come in are coming in, to find someone so they can stay. And oh, by the way, when they get here, we then give them transportation to wherever they want to go. But there's 1.3 million gotaways, they call them. These are people that come in and don't want to present themselves, and these are bad people. They're either been deported before, or they're criminals, or terrorists. Two types of terrorists, narco-terrorists, and then these other. So and I know that the law enforcement people, FBI and DHS and people like that, are working night and day, but the threat issue is very high. And it's not. I was talking to someone very senior recently in law enforcement, very senior, and they said it's not a matter of if, it's when, and how big it is. And so I'll end there, Kathy, and take questions, I guess. Okay.
Hi, my name is Maria. I'm a Jersey girl.
Yeah.
Also, if Trump gets in, would you go back if he asked you?
I can guarantee he won't ask me to come back. But look, I mean, people, the thing I learned, and this is, again, too bad about our country. The media, and I'm not overstating the case, regardless of what Donald Trump tried to do, and again, he is who he is and all of that, and not everything he wanted to do is, but he never even got a chance from the media to try to, and I used to say to them when I was chief of staff, I'd say, they'd write some story, I'd go down to the press bureau and say, where'd you get this? Off the record, where'd you get this? You got to know this is bull. Can I say bull? Yeah, bull. It's the other word. And they say, well, I got a source. I said, you wrote that story with one source? Are you kidding me? You know that's not true. And I'd say, look, I know you don't like him, and I know he gives you plenty of reason not to like him. But be journalists. Your job is to be a journalist. If you're going to be like an opinion hit piece person, then say you are. So my point is, regardless of what Donald Trump did, whether you like the guy or not, regardless of what he did, it was always reported badly. Great news about it, about unemployment rates, and particularly for our minority citizens, blacks, and unbelievably good news, never covered. But if he, broke wind in the Oval Office, that would be, he's. And so be careful, and I know you are, but be careful of what you read and where you read it. And because and the press is, Mr. Biden comes in, and again, I won't say anything bad about him. I'm not politically, but everything he does is positive. And we all know that no one's right all the time. But if you read about the current administration, almost everything is either not covered or explained away or said it was a great thing. And now, as the election comes back, and if the former president becomes a president again, we'll just go back to it, and it'll be. So the press thing was something that really bothered me. But no, I will say this: I spent my whole life serving my country. When given the opportunity to serve again, I've told that little story. I did it, but I will tell you, I had in my career as a Marine with Ben Cassidy, I worked on the Hill for 4 years, most of the time not in uniform. I went on Codels with them all over the world, taking members of the House, the Senate. Back in those days, Newt Gingrich, I know who spoke here, Newt was the speaker. First time the House had been Republican since like 1954 or something like that. But back in those days, they talked to each other. Dick Gephardt was a minority leader. Newt Gingrich, they weren't friends, but they worked together. Every Codel I went on, Codel would be anywhere, on average, 9 to 15 members of Congress, oftentimes their wives. But the rule was, and it wasn't Newt's rule, it went back for decades, that a Codel had to include Republicans and Democrats. When I hear there's a Codell out and they're reporting it on TV, or whatever, I make a point to find out who was on the Codell. In 2.5, 3 years, I have not seen a single mixed Codell. They're not even talking to each other. But my point is back to serving. I was completely unprepared. Again, in the military, your life is a life of service, team effort, pretty much selfless devotion to the mission, to include your life, if need be, sometimes. I was unprepared for the people that are among the Washington elite, if you will, who, have different priorities. So I don't think I could go back into that. It's not to say they're bad people. I'm just saying it's just. I gave when I first got to the White House, I talked to the staff. The White House staff is really big, but I had 3 sessions where I talked to them, and we were having a lot of leaks, and a lot of it was really hurting, the President Trump's thing, and they were all backbiting and stabbing each other in the back. So I got them all together, and I talked about how the New World Order, and Kelly's here, and I'm going to put some order to this. But long story short, I said to them at the end, and I offer this to you, and it's about our military, but it's also about about the elite. I said, look, you all took an oath, and I recited the oath. I said, I do solemnly swear to support and defend the Constitution, right down that line. So help me God. And by the way, we have people that don't like the so help me God anymore, so they're given the option to not say so help me God, beyond my comprehension. But anyways, but I said to them, there's another group of people that take that same oath, essentially the same oath that you took when you started working here at the White House. There's about 250,000 of them every year that take that same oath. They're the members that are coming into the U.S. military. And the difference in the oath, though, the spirit of the oath is they understand that that oath could cause them to lose their lives. And they're willing to take that chance to serve our country. I said, no one is going to ever ask you to give your life for the White House. So when you are thinking of doing something stupid, dumb, wrong, think of the 19-year-old or the 25-year-old who takes that same oath, and somehow try to put yourself in a better position, not to serve yourself, but to serve our country. So anyways, next one.
Audience wants to know what a Codell is.
Codell? Oh,
What is a
congressional delegation. What happens is a senior member, Newt Gingrich, I travel with him all the time. He would call me and say, hey, I want to go to the Middle East, these 3 countries. I say, okay, got it, boss. How many we taking? We're taking, how about 10 to 12? Okay, got it. He would give me the names of who would come. And then I would start working with the State Department and the embassies of the countries we would go to. I would arrange to have military aircraft to fly over, to fly us around, et cetera, et cetera. I'd keep all the bills and then try to get the money back from the members of Congress. Well, I didn't, I only had a salad that night, So, but that's what a congressional delegation is. And it's the military folks that typically take them around because we know how to do everything.
I just had a thank you for your service. I just have a question about the drug issue. What are two or three things you think can be done right now, whether it's top down, in the States, at the border?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's multi-level, right? So you tell the Customs and Border Protection people, lock the border down. Now, one of the things about our border, most people don't know this, unless you're from Texas or something, there's thousands of trucks every day that come up from Mexico, loaded with stuff like car parts, and are being driven to factories in South Carolina, Kentucky, places like that, with stuff that they made in Mexico. So thousands come in. If you stood on the border like I used to when I was at DHS, I would see these young woman, relatively young woman, driving a nice car with like 7 kids in the back seat, and I'd say to the Customs and Border Protection, "Who's that? What are they doing?" And they're waving. And they just come right in because they have permits. Oh, they're Mexican families, and their kids go to school, usually in Catholic schools, right along the border. So they come in every day, and they carpool, and they let the kids go into the school, and then they pick them up at the end of the day and drive them back to Mexico. It's a huge amount of very legal, very good movement back and forth across. And you're never going to get every bit of the drugs, but you can get a lot of it. So that's the first thing. The other thing is, and we used to do this at Southcom, working with the Mexicans and people like that to say, we'd give them intel, saying, if you go to this, I'm not going to tell you how I know this, but if you go to this house in the middle of Mexico City, and oh, by the way, if I were you, I'd bring a platoon of Marines with me, and kick the door in, and it would be a drug lab or something like that. So sharing intel with those people, because they're very cooperative with us, in spite of some of the things you hear, they're pretty cooperative. And again, but terribly dominated to a large degree by the cartels. And then law enforcement in our own country. It used to be if you got caught with drugs, you were prosecuted. And if the drugs you were grabbed with were not for personal use, if you will, like when I was a kid, if you get caught with a little marijuana, you go up, court, spend a night in jail, go to court, and they, give you, 6 months of, what do they call it? Yeah. Community service, something like that. But if you were caught with a larger amount, you were processed and you were going to go to jail, particularly hard drugs. But the law enforcement guys, I just spoke at a seminar thing I did at the FBI National Academy with about 150 law enforcement people from all over America, sheriffs and cops and all. And I said, we catch kids with drugs now, we don't even do anything because there's no point to it because the courts will let them go. So that's another, but the other thing, again, and I did get into this a lot, you can change behavior. And again, I'll go back to when I was a little boy, my mother was a heavy smoker. So when I was like 9, 10 years old, she'd give me a quarter to go down and buy a pack of Chesterfields, right? And I'd get, 6 cents back. So tobacco was freely available, inexpensive as heck, and anyone that had the money in. So what did we do? We started to put a lot of, this is maybe where good taxes are. Did I say good taxes? But the federal government started, and state government started putting really heavy taxes. A pack of cigarettes in Chicago, like right now, is like $12. So you make it expensive. Then you had to be 21 to buy it. And then we started telling people, okay, you can't smoke inside anymore, right? So everyone starts smoking right outside the door. And then over a few years, they said, no, you can't smoke within 500 feet of the building. So now you're in rain, it's out there rain. You still see some people doing it. When I was a kid, when my mom was smoking, over 75% of Americans were considered heavy smokers. That was a pack a day or more a day. Today, it's about 16%. So there's ways to do, and oh, by the way, there was this unbelievable campaign, you still see it, about how bad smoking is for you. If you're a mom and you smoke, you're very responsible because you're going to die early and your kids will be left by themselves. There's ways to do this. We did the same thing with Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And when I was a kid, you'd get in the car, there weren't seatbelts in the car, and you'd always grab like a six-pack for the ride, Now it's inconceivable for the amount of drug deaths, car deaths have gone down significantly. However, they're bouncing back. You know why? Drugs. And you can give someone a breathalyzer, and that's one of the deterrents about not drinking and driving. There's no way to test now if someone's high on drugs. So the number of the number of deaths are going up precipitously.
Question?
Okay, one more. Yes, sir. Semper Fi. That means always faithful.
I've been reading some news reports that the rockets and drones that are being sent into from Russia into Ukraine and also from Iran into Houthis have our own technology.
Yes. The thing about the drones is drone technology, drones up until recently have not been weaponized, right? For the most part. So like my son has like 5 drones. They fit on this table and he just flies them around and takes pictures from a distance. So the technology is pretty in today's world pretty simple. But now we've started to weaponize the drones. And so you have small drones now with a very small, let's say, explosive device, hand grenade, something like that. And they fly the drone right over the top of a tank and then drop the hand grenade into the tank. And you can't barely hear these things, and they're very small and all that. There are defenses more and more against them, and there's ways to deal with them. So they're not going to change war forever, but they are increasingly causing deaths and all. And then there's larger drones. One of the things that people in the military and certainly moral people are discussing now, up to this point, more drones are still under the control of a human being. They're not sent out there by themselves. So it's like, when you shoot an artillery piece, it's a human being shooting it, knowing where it's going or where they want it to go. So the human beings are in the loop. Now, war's awful, but it is war. The fear, in a very short order, the idea would be you just send drones out hunting on their own. So you just send them out to a part of the battlefield and let the drone look around and say, okay, I think that's, and this is all programmed in by artificial intelligence, and the drone decides to attack with no human in the decision loop. That's a real concern coming up. And drones will get, more advanced and all this, but to your point, the technology was developed commercially. I mean, they talk about using drones, right, to start delivering Amazon packages and all of that. So it's pretty simple technology. The harder technology is this AI stuff that is high tech. But again, I'll go back to, if you look at, and I'm not overstating the case here, but if you look at an awful lot of the weapon systems that the Chinese have, and you hear this all the time, they're masters at stealing intellectual property rights. That means, stealing our stuff. So you look at their airplanes, they look just like our airplanes, because in many ways they are our airplanes. Some Boeing or something spent $10 billion to decide this is the perfect shape for this fighter. They don't have to spend the money, they just, steal it. Same thing with our ships, same thing with our technologies, cyber and all of that stuff. They're very, very good at stealing our ideas. And since that was the last question, I won't go into how they do it, but they're very good at it. So with that, enjoyed talking to you. Hopefully it was helpful in some way, and thanks a lot.
Thank you, General Kelly, for your many years of service to our country.